April 18th, 1955. Princeton Hospital, 1:15 in the morning. A nurse named Albert Einstein is alone in the room with the most famous mind in human history. Albert Einstein opens his eyes. He says something, several sentences, clearly spoken with intention. And then he closes his eyes for the last time. Alberta Russell will later tell reporters she wished she could tell them what he said, but she couldn't. Because Albert Einstein, the man who explained the universe, chose to spend his final breath speaking a language she did not understand, and those words have never been recovered. Here is what you need to understand about Albert Einstein before we talk about how he died. He did not become famous slowly. In 1905, a single calendar year, he published 4 papers that each individually would have made most physicists the most important scientists of their generation. Special relativity, the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, mass energy equivalence. He was 26 years old. He was working as a patent clerk. He had no laboratory. The physics establishment did not know who he was. Within a decade, every physicist on Earth knew his name. He won the Nobel Prize in 1921, not for relativity, but it indicates the committee was still afraid of it, for the photoelectric effect, which is the foundation of every solar panel and digital camera that exists today. By the 1930s, he was not just famous, he was the singular symbol of human intelligence. When the Nazis came to power, he was in California. He never went back to Germany. He became an American citizen in 1940. He learned English. He gave lectures. He played his violin. He sailed on a small lake in New Jersey. He was also, and this is the part that matters for what comes later, a man who had spent 50 years in almost complete emotional exile. His first marriage ended in a negotiation where he literally offered his wife the Nobel Prize money as a divorce settlement before he had won it. His son Eduard had schizophrenia and spent most of his life institutionalized. Einstein saw him for the last time in 1933. He never went back. His closest collaborators described him as warm at a distance and unreachable up close. He once said, and I want you to hold this sentence, he once said, "It is strange to be known so universally and yet to be so lonely." He said that in 1952, 3 years before the night in Princeton Hospital. Now I want to tell you about the last 17 days of his life, because most people think Einstein died peacefully, surrounded by admirers at the end of a long and celebrated life. That is not what happened. On April 1st, 1955, Einstein collapsed at his home on Mercer Street in Princeton. An aortic aneurysm, a rupture in the main artery leaving his heart, had begun to leak. His doctors told him he needed surgery. He refused. Not because he was confused, not because he didn't understand. He understood exactly. He said, and these are his documented words, he said, "I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share. It is time to go. I will do it elegantly." He was admitted to Princeton Hospital on April 13th. He brought 2 things with him, his violin and 12 pages of handwritten calculations. His final attempt to solve that unified field theory, the equation that would connect gravity and electromagnetism, the problem he had been working on for 30 years without success. He worked on those pages from his hospital bed. His secretary Helen Dukas later said he was still correcting equations the evening before he died. Think about that. The man knew he was dying. He had refused to extend his life. He had made peace, or something that looked like peace, with the end. And still, the equations. Still the problem he would never solve. On the evening of April the 17th, the night before he died, he asked for his glasses and those 12 pages. He worked for a while. Then he set the pages down. He slept. At some point in the night, the aneurysm expanded. Princeton Hospital did not have the specialist who could have operated, even if Einstein had wanted one. They did what they could. At approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, the night nurse Alberta Rosell came on duty. She was alone with him. There were no family members present. His stepdaughter Margot was in the hospital. She was a patient herself in another ward. His son Hans Albert was in California. His son Eduard was in an institution in Zurich, as he had been for decades. His secretary Helen Dukas would arrive later, but at 1:15 in the morning in room 209 of Princeton Hospital there was only Alberta Rosell. And then Einstein opened his eyes, and he spoke. Alberta Rosell later described it this way. He spoke what sounded like several complete sentences. His voice was clear. He did not seem distressed. He seemed, and this is her word, purposeful. She leaned toward him. She could not understand a word. She had no German. When she was later asked by journalists what she thought he was saying, she replied simply that she didn't know. She didn't know. And within minutes, he was gone. April 18th, 1955. 1:15 a.m. Albert Einstein was 76 years old. Now I want you to sit with something. The most documented mind of the 20th century, a man whose words had been recorded, translated, reprinted, and analyzed for 50 years, died saying something that no one will ever know, not because it was lost in time, not because no one was present, because the one person in the room, the one witness to the last transmission of that mind, simply did not speak his language. That is not a historical footnote. That is the whole story. Now, what do we actually know about what he might have said? Not what he said. What he might have said. Because there are clues. First, language. Einstein's native language was German. He had spoken it since childhood, thought in it, dreamed in it. He had lived in America for over 20 years by 1955 and spoke fluent English, but under extreme physical and emotional stress. At the boundary of consciousness, people almost always revert to their first language, the language of childhood, the language you don't have to think to speak, so German makes complete sense. Second, what was on his mind? Those 12 pages of equations were still on his bedside table when he died. His biographers are nearly unanimous. The unified field theory was his obsession, his failure, and his unfinished sentence. He had spent 30 years trying to write an equation that would bring the entire physical universe under one roof. He never got there. Some physicists who knew him personally believed he knew by the end that he never would, that the problem was not solvable with the tools he had, that the generation who would solve it, if anyone ever did, had not been born yet. Third, his emotional state in his final weeks. People who visited him in Princeton in his last years described a man who had made a kind of settlement with solitude, who had stopped needing, or had learned to stop needing, the things he had never had. But there were cracks. He once told his friend and biographer, Abraham Pais, that his greatest regret was his relationship with his son Eduard, the son who had inherited something broken, the son he had left in Switzerland and never gone back to. Eduard would outlive his father by 8 years, still institutionalized, never knowing, as far as anyone can tell, that his father had died. So here is what we have. A man dying alone, functionally alone, in a hospital room at 1 in the morning, his life's work unfinished on the table beside him, his estranged son in an institution across the ocean, his first language in his mouth, and several clear, purposeful sentences spoken to a woman who could not understand them. The historians have been careful. They do not speculate, so I will. Not as fact, as the only honest thing left to do with a mystery that cannot be solved. I think he was still working. I think not the equations, not the physics, but the larger equation, the one that doesn't fit on paper. Why did I leave Eduard? Was it worth it? Did I do my share, or did I do my share of the wrong things? I think the last words of Albert Einstein were the same last words of almost every human being who has ever lived and been honest in the final moment. Not a theory, not an equation, a reckoning. Here is the last thing I want to tell you. After Einstein died, a pathologist named Thomas Harvey performed the autopsy. And then Thomas Harvey did something that was not authorized, not requested, and not legal. He removed Einstein's brain. He put it in a jar. He kept it in his house for over 40 years. He believed, he genuinely believed, that if he preserved it, science would eventually find the answer inside it. The thing that had made Einstein Einstein. The physical secret of that mind. He carried that jar through 2 divorces, multiple moves, and a decades-long career collapse. Other scientists eventually studied sections of it. They found some differences. A slightly unusual parietal lobe structure, denser glial cells, nothing that explained anything. The brain was, in the end, a brain. The secret was not in there. It was never going to be in there. Because what made Einstein Einstein was not architecture. It was obsession. It was the inability to stop. It was the willingness to work on an equation for 30 years that it would never solve, until the night before he died in a hospital bed, with an aneurysm expanding in his chest, and the last evidence of that mind, the final output, was spoken into a room where no one could receive it. Several sentences, clearly spoken, purposeful, gone, Alberta Russell died in 2011. She gave very few interviews about that night. In the ones she did give, she always said the same thing, that she wished she could have understood him, that she thought about it for the rest of her life.